Good morning, Chairman. We are now live.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the formal meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Rob Kendrick and I'm Chairman of the committee. I'd like to welcome all members, officers and guests present today, attending both here in the Council Chamber and on Teams. The video feed of this meeting is being broadcast via the County Council website, and I'd like to welcome members of the press and public who are watching our meeting online today. I'd like to welcome Councillor Mrs. Patricia Bradwell, Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety and Procurement, who is in attendance today via Teams. Welcome also to the following senior officers with us today: Joe Kavanagh, Assistant Director Early Help; Martin Smith, Assistant Director Children's Education; Linda Dennett, Assistant Director Children's Health and Commissioning. I'd like to begin with the usual health and safety announcement. There's no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through reception into the front car park and wait for further instructions. Can I please remind everyone to ensure their mobiles and other devices are on silent mode? Also, when invited to speak, can you please ensure you switch your microphone on? Otherwise, those attending the meeting via Teams and members of the press and public listening obviously will be unable to hear you. Please be aware you need to speak directly into the microphones to be heard. If during the course of the meeting you wish to raise a question, please raise your hand and my Vice Chairman, Councillor William Gray, will make a note of those who wish to speak. So now if we can move on to the business on the agenda today. Item 1 is apologies for absence and replacement members. Tom, do we have any apologies?
We have the following substitutions today. Councillor Baxter replacing Councillor Cleaver, Councillor Parker replacing Councillor Mrs. Killy, and Councillor Wright replacing Councillor Sear for this meeting only. We also have apologies from Heather Sandy, Janice Spencer and Councillor Rowe.
Thank you very much. And item 2 is declarations of members' interests. Members of the committee are reminded that they only need to declare any relevant interests which have not been declared on their declaration of pecuniary interest form. Do any members wish to declare an interest? No, that's clear. Thank you. Item 3 is minutes of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 22nd of April 2022. This is to confirm and sign the minutes from the meeting of the committee on the 22nd of April as a correct record. Do I have a proposer and seconder on the minutes? Councillor Whittington, Councillor Carter, thank you very much. We'll now vote on the minutes. You're voting on whether you agree the minutes are a correct record. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against? None. Abstentions? 1. Thank you very much. That's the minutes agreed. We now move on to item 4, which is announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Chief Officers. Since our last meeting in April, I attended the official openings of the new £6.5 million extension to the Special School Willoughby Academy in Bourne on the 6th of May and the brand new £13 million Special School Boston Endeavour Academy on the 13th of May. Both of these projects were part of the Building Communities of Specialist Provision strategy and have provided pupils in the Boston and Bourne areas with a fantastic new facility that will enrich their educational experiences. And I have to say, talking to the staff there, I was struck by the dedication and the enthusiasm the staff had in both of those places. It was very reassuring to see, and it was, I think, a very enjoyable occasion for the children as well who took part. On the 12th of May, Councillors William Gray, Tracy Carter and I visited the Customer Service Centre to gain a better understanding of the integrated front door process and the screening process for social care and early help. And I found it a very informative visit, and it's one we'd like to repeat to learn more about the types of phone calls that come into the centre. And again, I was struck by the professionalism of the staff that are there. I think it is a very impressive setup. And if any other members of the committee would be interested in visiting the Customer Service Centre, please contact Tracy, who will be arranging further visits. So it's open to anyone to visit. And finally, just to make everybody aware, I'm intending to have our customary well established now, comfort break before item 7 today. So before item 7 we'll be having our 10-minute break. Are there any Executive Council announcements from Councillor Mrs Bradwell?
Oh, I've done something, sorry.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I've just pressed something and I don't know what's happened, so apologies for that, everyone. Yeah, and apologies I can't be with you today. I've had operation on my foot, and obviously I've got a boot on, and actually I would find great difficulty sitting in the council chamber at the moment with my leg up. I don't know how I would be able to do that, so hence why I'm online. But just 2 announcements to make to the committee, and I think you'll agree with me. This is really shining the light on Lincolnshire. We had Helen and Odette, who went down to London to the organisation award at the British Dyslexia Association, and they actually came first on the work that they've been doing with our families in the community, going and supporting them. And I think that's a real achievement for Lincolnshire, and actually these 2 people are working with people, young people out in the community. So I would like to put on record, Mr Chairman, and I'm sure the committee will agree as well, that, to send our best wishes. I don't know whether you'd like me to write a letter and you and I sign it, Rob, saying how, we're really proud of what they're doing for the children and young people in Lincolnshire, but also to win a national award, I think, is a great achievement. And then secondly, we've got our children's health nurses. They've now been shortlisted and will be going down to London, and that's for work on with families on continents. And actually they've been doing some really quite innovative work with families, and successfully treating and improving the quality of life of the children. So again, I don't think there's anything like that this been happening around the country, and we wish them good luck and hope they come back with an award and get their work recognised across the country. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Thanks to Councillor Bradwell. Yes, of course, I'll be more than delighted to join you in signing the letter. I think it's great how many times we hear in this committee actually success from our staff across the county, and it's great that we get the recognition here. So that's great news. Thanks very much. Do we have any Chief Officer announcements from Joe Kavanagh? No, on behalf of Heather? No? Okay. Right, we now move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is Family Hub's Feasibility and Refresh Supporting Families programme, which formerly lived under the title of Troubled Families. This item is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by Councillor Mrs Bradwell between the 4th and 8th of July. And I'd like to welcome Tara Jones, Head of Service Children and Care Transformation, Hannah Fassler, Interim Head of Service for Boston and the South Holland locality, who will be presenting this report. So it's over to you, Tara and Hannah.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. So, as you said, this report invites the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee to consider a report on the Family Hub's feasibility and the Refresh Supporting Families programme. So just a little bit of background around the Family Hubs. As you know, there are huge government drivers and funding available for local authorities, not only across the Family Hubs approach, but Start for Life, reducing parental conflict, and the Supporting Families programme. So Family Hubs, they're a way of joining up locally and bringing together existing universal and early help services together to improve access to services for families, connections between families, professionals and services and providers, and really putting relationships at the heart of family support. A change in the Family Hub approach is it brings together services for children of all ages, so 0 to 19 or up to 25 if a child has special educational needs or disability. And really importantly, Family Hubs have a great Start for Life offer at their core. So Family Hubs will also be an information gateway to families, where parents access the Family Hub, they will be able to find out about all the services delivered anywhere within the network, but more importantly within their own communities, whether that be physical, virtual, which has become really important through the pandemic, or via outreach and beyond. They will be able to find out about open access services and services where appointments or referrals are required. What we know in Lincolnshire, children's centres are at the heart of the Family Hub's delivery. That's the physical centre. Family Hub services can also be delivered in other physical spaces within the community, virtually, and there's a strong digital offer for families. Other services, they can be delivered in the home of families, and again, outreach forming an integral part of Family Hubs. It really is about harnessing the community resources. They say it takes a village to raise a child. So the reasons for the recommendations. So Lincolnshire is in a really strong position to build upon the existing strengths of the children's centres, the early childhood strategy and early help system. That's been endorsed by Ofsted in our recent inspection. The opportunity has arisen for Lincolnshire to be part of the 75 local authorities that have been pre-selected to receive base level grant funding over the next 3 years to move towards a Family Hub approach. Whilst the Family Programme Guide for those eligible local authorities is still being developed, we've seen a draft guide. We know that local authorities will need to evidence that they can meet a number of minimum expectations to be able to draw down on that funding. But also there will be some go further expectations and some opportunities for trailblazing local authorities to receive additional funding, which is great, and we're very much, Lincolnshire is in a position to become a trailblazer based on their partners in practice status. So trailblazers will need to lead the way on early development, delivery across all strands of the programme, to create quick change and also establish best practice and share that across the country with other local authorities. So option 2, which is the recommendation, that will enable the council to continue with the current momentum coming from the Family Hub feasibility assessment and enable early planning and self-evaluation ahead of the sign-up process that we think will be towards the end of summer, with the release of the grant anticipated in the autumn of 2022. So how this links with the Supporting Families programme. So again, what we've seen is a refreshed Supporting Families programme, and the government very much sees Family Hubs as being at the heart of delivering the Supporting Families programme. So we've seen a refreshed programme and an introduction of a new outcomes framework and a new early help system guide. The new outcomes framework is designed to support more families to achieve better outcomes, and also for the council to maximise the payment by results. Local authorities are required to produce with partners a co-produced self-assessment against the new early help system guide. And we need to build the evidence of what works locally for families. And again, there's an expectation to link the programme with other council priorities, such as a Start for Life offer and Family Hubs. So, in summary, the feasibility Appendix 1 has confirmed that we have a strong and mature early help system, and it is the envy of other local authorities. However, it has highlighted opportunities to further strengthen our offer and delivery of services to children and families to maximise impact and outcomes. The current cost of social care for children and families in England is £5.7 billion. So we have an opportunity to utilise the new funding to get alongside and strengthen families and communities that children grow up in, providing support and early help to prevent needs from escalating and becoming critical, so they need support from statutory services. So the report therefore recommends to the committee to approve option 2 for the commencement of early planning against the Start for Life and Family Hub programme guide, and acceptance of the selection for the grant and the submission of Lincolnshire's ability to meet the grant requirements. And thank you, and this concludes my report.
Thanks very much, Tara. I do like to hear the word trailblazer in connection with Lincolnshire County Council Services, and it's not the first time we've heard it, which is great news. Anyway, I'd like to invite members of the committee now to comment on the report. Councillor Gray, do we have any speakers indicating?
No one indicating yet, Mr. Chairman. Oh, Councillor Smith.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Do we have any idea what the potential funding impact to the council would be if the programme wasn't supported by Majesty Government funding in future years, as this seems to, in my experience, often be the case the first 3 years? Her Majesty's Government likes to give us some money for all these things, and then it turns into business as usual and we're left holding the proverbial baby. Obviously, our funding is not an endless pit, and whilst the programme seeks to do very good work, and I commend officers on the work they've done so far, what sort of processes have we got in place to ensure we can fund this ourselves without causing us any budgetary problems in future years?
That's a really excellent question. I'll just come in first of all. I was just really wanted to say that as you all know, we're in a really, really strong position already, as Tara's just outlined, because we have been very fortunate to have the support of this committee and our lead member and council in retaining our children's centres. So this is some additional money which for many local authorities across the country will be the starting point of them developing these services. We're really fortunate in the sense that we've already got really strong services. So from the outset, we would have perhaps had to make some more challenging decisions around future services going forward, but we're in a very strong position. So this funding coming in creates some opportunities, but doesn't require us to rely on that short-term funding in the same way that we perhaps would with other initiatives, if that makes sense. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Tara.
No, I think you've answered that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Whittington, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Excellent report. Thanks, Tara. Question really is, I know in the past we've spoken about the importance of doing downstream stuff to actually start to deal with an awful lot of these problems, right at the start, because it's better for the child, it's better for the council, it's more cost-effective and cost-efficient way of doing things. So, by going down this particular route, what impact is that likely to have in terms of the impact on some of our other services? Will it reduce demand in the future on some of the services because of the early intervention nature of this? Just a little bit of a background on that, I think, would be useful to sort of understand this in the context of the wider picture. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. I mean, the family hubs approach and the supporting families approach, all of it is around really supporting families when difficulties or worries start to emerge. But also the Family Hub is focused on that real strong universal offer and builds upon that. So we know that we've got the Children in Care Transformation Programme that is also looking about how we can maximise impact for children in care, but also where it's safe to do so, we can reunify them with their family. So at the other end, what we need to be focusing on, what Family Hubs absolutely does, and the Start for Life offer will support those worries and difficulties not escalating to the point where children and families worries are so much that they need intervention from statutory social care.
Thank you. Councillor Parker, I believe you have a question.
Thanks. I wonder if I could ask a practical question in the sense of what is a family hub in relation to, let's say, my division or anybody else's division for that matter, because I've read about family hubs in Appendix 2 of the report, and it's sound, it's philosophical, it knows what it's saying, it's trying to get a message across. But in the physical sense, where are they going to be based and how many are there going to be? Or are they going to build on children's centres, for example? I've got a children's centre in Lincoln, Car Home, and I just wonder, for the benefit of everybody, I suppose, how many, where?
Thank you. Yeah, I think what's happened is family hubs, I think people have thought that's something different to a children's centre. It really is a family hub approach, and very much so based around our children's centres in the localities being that core physical delivery hub. As you know, we've got 48 children's centres across the localities. What we need to do as well is there are some what we call seldom reachable families, and so that's where the outreach comes in, and we very much want to use resources in the community as well as physical spaces and work with our community and voluntary sector to do so, because for some families, it might be that they go to their local church for support, and actually what we need to do is build on the family hub approach, you know, with faith sectors, with other community and voluntary resources, and also the digital offer. What we know from when we undertook the early help strategy consultation with families, that they very much appreciated the virtual offer that we had in place during the pandemic, and they really want to build on that in terms of being able to access themselves through a digital platform and know exactly what is on offer within their own community and their own locality.
From my point of view, it's a concept rather than a location.
Yes, it is, and we've got many of those facets already here in Lincolnshire to build upon.
Thanks very much. Do we have another question? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, and yeah, very comprehensive report. And I was looking especially towards where the Equality Act is mentioned, and it says that there will be work with people not just with protected characteristics, but people that fall outside of that. And of course, in recent times, we have welcomed a lot of refugees into the county, and also now evacuees, as I prefer to refer to Ukrainians, because a lot of people, you know, do intend going back to their own country. But for some of the work that I'm doing, we're now picking up the fact that there might be a case, especially with Ukrainian families, where they might not want to identify themselves as being in need, but obviously they're going to fall into this bracket. So it's just a reassurance that the part of this work is going to be making sure that we encompass everybody. I know there's a reference to people where English is a second language, and also seldom reachable is what we're using now. But it's just that I do believe there's going to be that bit of an issue there, and it's just looking to see that what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Family Hub approach and Start for Life should be for everybody. Absolutely everybody, and part of what we need to do as the development of the Family Hub is around our communications, our branding. We want every place in the community that a family might go to access information about family hubs, for it to be welcoming. It's really built on connection and those relationships. And what we know is a welcoming first impression where every family asks for support, that really makes a difference, that connection and those relationships. So absolutely.
Thanks very much. Do we have any further questions? Everyone happy? That's great. Thanks very much. Well, just to recap on the actions required of us, we're invited to firstly consider the attached report and to determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive Council as set out in the report, and secondly, agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Council in relation to this item. And we've had one or two comments raised this morning which Tracy's made a note of, so I think that's very useful. The only thing I would say, I think if we can have any arrangement whereby things are coordinated is to be welcomed, because so often when things go wrong and there's an investigation, it turns out it's a communication breakdown somewhere along the line. So I hope we can have this really working well with good communication. I think that's very important, and we look forward to future developments on this case as time goes on. So I would like to propose that we support the recommendations. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Carter. Thank you very much. We'll now vote on the item, and we're voting whether you support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor and agree to provide the additional comments to the Executive Councillor. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any against? No? No abstentions. Thank you, that's supported. Thank you for that. We'll now move on to item 6 on the agenda, and this is recommissioning of the Best Start Lincolnshire Services Early Years and Family Service and Inclusion Service for children in their early years and their families within Lincolnshire. And again, this item is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive on the 5th of July. And I'd like to welcome Charlotte Gray, Head of Service, Children's Strategic Commissioning, and who will be presenting the report, and also Sarah Gregory, Commissioning Manager, Children's Strategic Commissioning, who's in attendance in the Council Chamber, and Melissa Cullingham, Commissioning Officer, who's attending via Teams to help answer any questions. So it's over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to say to the committee that I appreciate that the report pack is very long on this item, so thank you for reading it. I will try my best to summarise it as briefly as possible, but I hope you appreciate we're talking about 2 services, so I need to provide a little bit of detail. So we're here to share the findings of the review that's been undertaken of the Commission Best Start Lincolnshire services, and to recommend the recommissioning of the services via a competitive tender process. The Best Start Lincolnshire services include 2 separate contracts at the moment. So we've got the Early Years and Family Service, which provides early learning activities for children in their early years and their parents and carers. Activities are mainly run from our children's centre buildings, and they focus on supporting the development of children to give them the best start of life and make sure that they're ready when they go to school. The service also provides a skills development offer for eligible parents and carers to help them into training, volunteering and employment. A creche facility is available to help these parents and carers to access skills development where there is no other possible childcare option available. We then have the second contract, which is the inclusion service. This runs in Boston, South Holland and Lincoln areas at the moment, and is for ethnic minority families with children in their early years. The service supports these families to engage in the early years and family service, and also includes the running of multinational groups at children's centres, targeted home visits, and provides translation support at key meetings as well with these families. These contracts are both due to end at the end of March 2023, and their combined annual value is £1.936 million. The Council does not have an explicit statutory duty to commission these early childhood services, but there are some specific statutory related duties under the Childcare Act 2006, which are set out on page 90 of your pack. Most notably, we must make arrangements to secure that early childhood services in our area are provided in an integrated manner. We must improve the well-being of young children and reduce inequalities between them. We must have sufficient children's centres to meet local need, and we must consult before any significant changes are made to children's centre provision. Within the committee papers, there is a commissioning plan at Appendix 1, which sets out the key findings of the review that's been undertaken, and I'd like to draw the committee's attention to some key points. So there are some key areas within our needs assessment data that we really need to take note of and respond to. It's important that we all recognise that the early years population is a real priority and a chance to make a real impact and difference to the long-term life chances of children and young people and adults, particularly for this cohort, because due to the pandemic, so many of these children have missed out on some of those really vital first opportunities in their lives, particularly around socialisation. Lincolnshire's early years population is decreasing, if you look at our census data. Our communities are becoming more diverse, and we've seen a 20% increase since 2017 in children aged under 5 from ethnic minority backgrounds, and that's across the county where we're seeing those increases. Public health data continues to indicate that in some areas we're behind nationally, including pregnant women smoking at time of delivery, our immunisation rates and breastfeeding rates. We also saw many parents during the height of the pandemic obviously very worried and opting out of some of their health visitor checks. I'm pleased to say that that's, that there's a recovery there, and more families are obviously engaging that. But they're vital opportunities for our health visitors to identify if any families are struggling and may need some extra help. On a positive note, we're above the national average for children who access their 2-year-old early years entitlement in this county, and we're on a par nationally for the 3-year-old offer. And our health visitor checks for children aged 2 to 2.5 indicate that Lincolnshire children are achieving a good level of development compared to national averages at that age. However, we do acknowledge that we are below national averages in terms of the good level of development for children at the end of the early years and foundation stage, and that there has been a rise in children in Lincolnshire with an education, health and care plan under the age of 5. Registration at children's centres has been consistently very high, but attendance at centres hasn't always matched this to the same level. And now centres are fully open again, we need to make sure that our families are coming back through the door and engaging in activities, trying to catch up some of the things that may have been missed. There is a very, very strong evidence base around the first 1,001 days of a child's life that are critical to their development and their future life chances. We also know there's a key link between parental mental health and the subsequent long-term development of children. We believe that it's important to have strong support for all of our children in their early years and days and their parents and carers. The support that families receive should help them to bond with their child, to be their child's first educator and to understand and meet their child's emotional and developmental needs. The current Best Start services have largely performed well through the contract period, and they evolved rapidly to deliver virtual contact when children's centres were closed during the pandemic. Feedback from families about these services is overwhelmingly positive. Pre-pandemic, the number of early years and family service sessions delivered in our children's centres was increasing really positively, particularly for vulnerable families, and the number of outreach sessions that were taking place in communities was also increasing. Obviously, the number, this was impacted by the pandemic when we had to close centres, but we were also seeing really positively that the number of families and with vulnerable children attending sessions was increasing too. So the pandemic obviously has taken a hit on that. Referrals for skills development support increased at the start of the contract, but then it decreased even before the pandemic. Overall, since the start of the contract, 65% of people who were referred to skills development enrolled onto learning, and 11% secured employment. We've seen a growth in both the registration and attendance at children's centres from ethnic minority families, which is what we'd expect given the growth in our population. The inclusion service itself has delivered multinational groups really successfully, but arguably the most successful part of that contract has been their engagement with over 90% of vulnerable ethnic minority children in their early years in Boston, South Holland and the Lincoln area, providing them with targeted support. We noted an increase in referrals for direct support as well from the service for more vulnerable families. So engagement, we've spoken to lots of families that use centres, families that don't necessarily use centres at the moment, and professionals who work in and around children's centres. We've provided with some of the following feedback. So families really like attending children's centre buildings, but they also want sessions that are run from their local communities as well, so that hybrid offer. And they really valued outdoor sessions with their children as well, so not always being in a building. Evidence-based sessions were really highly rated by families, and having sessions that can be targeted to meet a specific local need is important too, because we know that different areas have different needs in our county. We need to ensure that children with SEND and their parents and carers feel equally able to participate in all of these sessions as well. That's really important. People felt the inclusion service should be available county-wide, given the growing demand for support, particularly for more vulnerable children. It was felt that the council's commissioned corporate translation service should be better used, though, for more of the generic translation requests that come through the service. We identified a key area of duplication between the skills development element of the early years and family service and the council's internal adult skills and family learning service. So detailed work has been undertaken to map both of those provisions. The skills development offer enables eligible engages eligible users and signposts them to existing learning that's predominantly arranged by the council service. And the council service works with much higher volume of people, and the qualification rate is higher within the council service as well. So the model for the new contract is proposed that it won't significantly change, but there are some refinements based on the review. So an early years and family service will continue to be provided from children's centres mainly, but there will be more use of other community venues. And you've just heard from the previous paper how important that will be as family hubs evolve. Sessions will be able to be accessed by families from the antenatal period, and if they have children in their early years. There'll be a strong emphasis on activities for children in their very early years, recognising the key age, the key developmental age there, and given that we know that such a high proportion of our children are in early years settings by the time they reach the age of 3. There will be a core menu of sessions that will be available universally, that will be fun and engaging for families, but they will also be strongly aligned to the prime areas of the early years and foundation stage, as well as key public health priorities. Targeted sessions will still be available to meet local population needs, as well as direct work with vulnerable families as well. The emphasis of all activities will be about supporting parents to be their child's first educator, to help them to develop their child as well, which will be really important. And there will continue to be really, really strong working between the providers of the services that we're talking about, health visiting, midwifery, and our own early year service. We really want families of children with special educational needs and disabilities to feel able to engage in these sessions and know that their children's needs can be met. And it will be really important that this service works with our own SEND services and other services such as Portage to make sure that we're drawing on the knowledge and expertise of professionals about how we make sure that happens. We propose to widen the inclusion service to cover the county to create an equitable offer. We recognise that families from ethnic minority backgrounds are already engaging well within existing early years and family service provision, which is great. And what we want to do is make sure that the inclusion service becomes more focused on supporting families with children in their early years from ethnic minority backgrounds that are identified as vulnerable, and they're in hard to reach communities, so that their focus is much more working with those families. The service will help families to access the early years and family service still, and also health visiting and midwifery sessions. They will co-deliver as appropriate to make sure that families understand what's been said in terms of translation. But we want to make sure that actually translation is very much around working with those families and not broader translation, because we've got the corporate contract that should cover that. The funding of the service will alter slightly. So there will be a saving from not continuing to commission a skills development element, which we do not feel is the best use of resource, because we feel that there is a clear duplication there. Although increasing the reach of the inclusion service will mean that the cost of that service will sort of net off some of the saving that would have been made. A breakdown of the funding proposal is on page 99, and overall we anticipate the contract price in total will be up to just over £2 million if VAT is included, but there will be a net saving of just over £200,000 per annum based on current contract prices that are in place. We're recommending to Executive that we recommission the Best Start Lincolnshire services via an open competitive tender process with 2 lots to commence on the 1st of April 2023 for 3 years, with an option to extend for 2 further years. 2 lots will ensure that we don't minimise market interest, particularly given the inclusion service will require the staff working in it to be fluent in multiple languages. But there may be an opportunity, if one provider was able to cover both services, they may bid for both. We are also recommending that Executive delegates to the Executive Director of Children's Services, in consultation with the Exec Councillor for Children's Services, the authority to take all decisions necessary to conduct the procurement process, up to and including the award and entering into of the contract. Okay, so apologies that was so long, but thank you.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. Yes, a lot of information there, but thanks very much for that. Do we have any questions to Charlotte? Councillor Whittington.
Thanks, Charlotte. Again, thanks for another excellent report. A couple of questions. In terms of, obviously, when we're going out to re-procurement, what's the market like out there? Are there sort of many providers, or just to get some sort of feel for what it's like? And we mentioned about hard to reach families. I'm just wondering what can we do? What do we do that's sort of over and above what we would normally do to try and get these families to to engage with the process? And then finally, a general sort of question around post-pandemic, and you sort of referred to in your presentation that obviously there's been obviously during the pandemic with children's centres being closed, there's some sort of catch-up work to be done. Just if you could just explain the sort of work you're kind of doing around that to sort of try to bridge those missing gaps, and how long you think it'll potentially be before that gap has been addressed. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So in response to your first question, the market engagement that we've been doing would indicate that we feel that we've got a sufficient market to go out and have multiple providers come back and bid. Based on the last time we went out to the market for this, we had 4 providers bid on the main contract, but we only had 1 provider bid to deliver the translation service, I think is correct. Which is why we're really keen that we don't want to lump both of these services together and then restrict what we might get in terms of the early years and family service. So we're comfortable, and sort of that market testing, we're comfortable we will get an element of competition there. In terms then of the hard to reach communities, so there's a whole variety of different ways. So we're really lucky that with our health visitors that they're a universal service, and that's a great opportunity for people to go out and visit families and get to know if they're struggling with something and identify actually if they need some additional support. So often with some of our hard to reach families, it's about knowing who they are and then using trusted professionals to try and guide them to access other support. So our health visitors will guide and support families into children's centres. That's one of the things that they do, is including our family health workers, similar with early help workers. But also we do work with schools and early year settings. So if there are siblings of families, they do like pop-up children's centres in some of our schools. So there's a whole raft of things, but it's really about bringing services into the community and not necessarily expecting these communities to travel really far to access support, which is why outreach is really important. And the third one, in terms of the post-pandemic, it's a really tricky one, because I think all of our, and Joe, you might want to talk to this more clearly in terms of the services that deliver, and certainly from commission service, they're obviously very cited on the fact that it's particularly at things like communication and language development. I think people are seeing that children maybe aren't quite where they need to be. Their confidence in terms of going into new social settings and maybe going into bigger crowded spaces and things, that they're just not there because I've not had those experiences as much. So a lot of the sessions now that are going on in children's centres are really focused on communication and language, and making sure that if we think that any children aren't where they need to be, catching them now and making sure that we're getting some more bespoke work. And that's where our own early year services come in, because we've got specialist teachers and early years practitioners who are really there to work with the children that we think are not quite where they need to be, and work really hard to get them where they need to be ready for school. But I don't think we should be under any illusion. We are likely to see that this generation of children may still struggle by the time they may not be quite where their peers may have been, but yeah.
We are experiencing some challenges across all of our children. We all know, I guess, everyone in this room who either has a child or a grandchild or knows somebody with a child will know, for those children that were born during the pandemic or were very young during the pandemic, their exposure just on a very general basis to other people was really limited. I think schools are reporting to us they are seeing children starting, in reception with not quite the level of skills across the piece, or relationship skills, or even sharing with other children, because they just didn't have experience of the things that we all took for granted, really. So across the piece, all of our services are working really hard on that. In terms of, we're really lucky in Lincolnshire, you've heard already through the previous paper, we've got a really strong system. We have our health visitors who are able to work really closely with our early help workers, with our early years practitioners, and really focus on that. And I think the other thing is that at the moment we've got an absence of data, of progress data. And so when we get the first set of progress data, that will give us an opportunity to really re-evaluate and benchmark again where we are in Lincolnshire nationally, and where we absolutely need to prioritise, but it is something that we're all really conscious of.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As somebody who's got 4 granddaughters, all 7 and under, obviously this is sort of quite concerning, and a 5th grandchild, a 5th granddaughter to be born in a few months' time. It is an area of concern for us to, just ensure that if they have missed out on services, that there is a way for them to catch up, so they reach the level that they need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parker, I believe you have a question.
Yeah. I think there's really a lot of good stuff in this, and the recommissioning area that I was interested in, which I can't find, but it's a long document, and it wasn't mentioned by yourself, was about social media and the relationship between that and hard-to-reach children and families. Of course, face-to-face meetings in groups, hubs, children's centres are a central core and important. But I just wonder whether or not we've got an underlying social media strategy as part of this recommissioning exercise.
Sorry, hi. Yes, as part of our engagement strategy, that falls under there in terms of how we're communicating out to families. To assure you, social media's part of, it's quite targeted in terms of children, for children's centres and activities already. So the current provider, and also Lincolnshire County Council, is we do a lot of promotion of sessions on a daily basis. This is what's on in your area. I can't remember if it's through the Lincolnshire County Council, there's a dedicated children's centre page. So if you were on Facebook, you would be able to follow that, and that would automatically come up. But there's actually a lot of targeted, it appears on a lot of our families who've got children in that demographic, because obviously they might search for certain things and it connects that they're in this area, and then we can sort of get that fed through. And then it's a requirement of the commissioned provider as well, in terms of their marketing of services, that they have to engage. So when we go out currently, and then when we go out to procurement and whoever any of the new providers will be, we will be working then with them in terms of how they are advertising and making sure that families understand. And that might be social media, because obviously we know that that's something that's predominantly used by people now, but it's not just social media. There are other more on the ground in communities, in venue, in the local co-op, in the doctor's surgery, and other places as well, where children's centre activities are publicised too. So there's sort of a mixed economy in terms of promotion.
Thank you. Councillor Bradwell, I believe you was to come in.
Yes, I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, that actually sit on the LGA Children's Board, and this is a conversation that has been sort of being brought into conversations the last couple of meetings we've had. So I think it's a national problem, and I do think I've got a friend who's got a little grandson, and exactly how Charlotte's explained, doesn't really feel at ease mixing, but obviously it's getting better now. So I think as we go on, I think it's something that every local authority is picking up on. And actually with our DCS and ADs, but definitely the DCS group, I mean, they meet across the country as well, and in the East Midlands. And I think we'll all be looking at what each other's doing to see, where are we doing what everybody else is doing, or somebody who's being successful. So, but I think, to be honest, we've all probably had children. Well, majority probably have had children, and we've got grandchildren. And, it's about you know, encouraging children to mix, isn't it? I had a daughter who hated mixing as a child. She hated going to school, and you know, it is something that we as parents and children's centres and if our workers are working with families, we all have to, I think, bear in mind, and we have to try and do all we can to get children to feel at ease mixing and playing, and in playing I think children develop. So that's all I want to say, Mr. Chairman. It is a big issue, actually. The conversations been having this morning are being had across the country, and I know that's you might say, well, we're thinking about Lincolnshire, and we are, but I think there will be quite a lot of learning, and actually you know, forever in the future, I think it'll be something that if we were ever locked down again, you know, it is about our staff and giving parents, when they're at home with children on their own, trying to encourage some, you know, play and all sorts of things like that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bravo. Yes, clearly it's a national issue. Councillor Baxter, I believe you have a question.
I do. Thank you, Chairman, and I apologise for being late, and apologies that I'm not as up to speed with this as the rest of the committee. I don't know all the acronyms. I don't know all the technical terms. And crumbs, you get a lot of paperwork, don't you? You as a committee, you've got a lot to read. I wanted to emphasise, I think, what the last councillor said, that this is crucial to what we're doing. Arguably the most important, or one of the most important things that we do as a council. And I noticed it made me chuckle on page 111 that the recent report from the Children's Commissioner for England said that every baby needs a loving relationship with their parents and a safe home. And I thought, well, that's the Institute of the Bleeding Obvious, isn't it? Surely we all recognise that every baby needs a loving relationship, but in order to create that nurturing, to enable those parents is crucial, because as the report says, the gap in attainment is not whether or not you graduate. Your life chances are not dictated as to whether you graduate from Oxford or Nottingham Trent or any other institution, or even as an apprentice. The gap is not at A-level or GCSE or at 11+. The gap is in the first 1,001 days. Most of your life chances are determined then. As for questions, I haven't seen within the paperwork, how long is the contract length? How long are people taking this on for? How long have we got the ability to award a contract for? And if it's a significant length, then what are the options for continuing that? So in order to create stability within the service, is it going to, it's not, I'm hoping you're not going to say it's a 1 or a 2 year contract. Is it possible to deliver in-house? I don't know if we'd ever want to, but is it something that the county council could deliver directly and they have more control over it, like in the old days? With regard to the population, how do you match the percentage of participation of BME groups against the percentage in the population? And I've read that there's a significant amount of translation for Eastern Europeans, which I imagine is a significant part of our BME population, but I couldn't find within the report, probably because I haven't looked hard enough, what percentage is from South Asian origin, what percentage is Gypsy Traveller, and are we sure that we're communicating with those groups as we might expect to, purely arithmetically? I didn't know what vulnerable children meant. I can guess, but surely all children are vulnerable. We know that, but I guess some are from more vulnerable backgrounds. And to what extent do we collaborate with primary schools so that when they finish their 1,001 days and then go on to the rest of their life, what feedback do we get from primary schools to say whether or not what we're doing is working? Thank you. Sorry about the barrage.
I hope I'm going to remember to answer all of the questions. Tell me if I don't. Okay, so the first one about the contract length. So it will go to the market for up to a maximum of 5 years. So we will go, first of all, for an initial contract period of 3 years with an opportunity to extend for a further up to 2 years. That's normally done based on performance, so that if there was a service that wasn't performing well, you would automatically be able to invoke the break clause and not extend it, basically. So we would hope that we would get a high-performing service, and that we would have up to 5 years for this contract. In terms of how long can contracts be, we're not bound by anywhere to say sort of a maximum time for a contract, but a 5-year contract period across the council is pretty standard in terms of what we go out for, mainly because things change so much within a 5-year period, and often we might get caught by procurement regs if we wanted to vary a contract, and if it was a substantial modification, we would get legal challenge. And so what that means is that even if you did have a fantastic provider, you couldn't just keep going, and then on the same specification you'd want to vary it within that period, and so we would be restricted with what we could vary. So that tends to be why we go for that length of time. In terms then of the in-house option, yep, that's fully explored. So within the commissioning plan, it looks at in-house. Now, one of the key barriers, these services historically have always been, they've been mainly delivered by voluntary community sector, charitable organisations, basically. And the reality is, if we were to insource, there would be a significant implication on the staffing costs for staff that transferred to the authority, who then would be eligible for local government pension, for example, and that would mean then the volume and capacity of support that we could offer would reduce. And it's also felt that we've got a really good market, and a lot of our families love working with these organisations. They don't necessarily want to work with particularly our more vulnerable families, the staff that they might then associate with social workers and things. There's good feedback, and we feel that the voluntary community sector and other organisations outside of the council provide a really strong basis from which to commission the service. So we do look at insourcing, but there are some financial barriers, I think, as to why we might not put that as the preferred option. And then in terms of the population participation incentives in terms of our ethnic minority communities, so that's really tricky because the way that we record the data it is hard to draw that out. I might defer to either Melissa or Sarah in a minute, because who manage the contracts in more detail. They might say that they have got that data, but we know, for example, with the inclusion service, because where we've got specific children who are known to children's services and open to us, who are then working with that service, that's how we can say to you 90% of that cohort are engaged with that service, because we know those children. But when we're getting data from the census, we can do like crude mathematics around proportionally how many children we're seeing, but it doesn't necessarily give us a really accurate picture. So I don't know whether Sarah or Melissa have got anything. Do you want to come back while I answer the next bit, if that's okay? And then in terms of vulnerable, that's a really generic term, but we use that to mean children who are open to children's services in some way. So that could be through child in need, child protection, child in care, they could, early help. So in some way, they've been identified as being vulnerable and open to us. Did you want to come in on that one, Jo?
I was just going to say, so your universal provision is, your children's access services that anybody could access, and then it's more targeted if it's a child with a plan. We could talk about a child with a plan of need. So, as Charlotte said, that could be delivered by our early help services, which isn't a statutory service, or it could be that it's the statutory social care service, which is where there's a concern either around, significant harm or development, or a need for children to be in care, really. Yeah. But you did a really good job, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just trying to find the right pages on your reports pack. So on page 116 of your reports pack, it does provide a breakdown of the BME percentage of the 0 to 5 population that are registered within children's centres. And then on page on page 125 of your report pack as well, it also breaks down the number of percentages registered at children's centres and those then numbers of BME families who are engaging in children's centre offer. Sorry, is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, through you, Chair, I got that bit, I found that bit. I couldn't see any breakdown, or in this table, all BME are together. So there's no breakdown of
yeah, and so, sorry, just to add on that, so sometimes that is really hard for us to break down because of the way the data's collected through the system, but the majority of the registrations of the BME families are Eastern European families. But we can get, if you want to see some more breakdown, we can try and pull out what we can, but it's often, as Charlotte said earlier, it's how the data is collected. It's sometimes really hard because they might register themselves under a different ethnicity or something, and so you end up with a long list of other. But we can, if you want to see it, we can try and pull out what we can.
Okay, and just there was a point there around the primary school link up and how we're making sure that we get feedback. So the early year, this contract sort of sits under the responsibility of our head of service for early years, who sits within, so they work very closely with our education team as well, in terms of making sure that we're really clear on a lot of the data that's coming out. Is that giving us any indications that children may not be where they need to be when they start school, and maybe some of the areas and gaps. So at a strategic level, those connections are being made. And then on the ground, in terms of individual schools, as I referenced before, some of our children's centres are mainly on school sites, to be honest with you. Most of the buildings are. And they're very connected within their local communities. Often the children that attend them are then going to go next door to reception the next year, for example. So they have a lot of close relationships in terms of understanding those communities, but they also do a lot of pop-up sessions within schools as well, and also through our head teacher briefings and our early years briefings as well, because most of our children, over 90% by the time they get to 3, are in a early years setting. They're getting access for their free 30 hours within a setting. And so you tend to see that not as many children after the age of 3 are going to a children's centre. Much more of them are within an early year setting. And so there's a real link up there as well between our settings and the schools that they're going to around transition. And those children that aren't in a setting, they're the children that are being seen more by, they might be going to a children's centre, but there are conversations to be had. I suppose maybe an area that we could strengthen, if I was being honest, was our the provider working with their local schools more. But it does happen a lot already, but maybe an area that we should explore and see if we can strengthen going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe you wish to come in.
I think Charlotte's done a really thorough job again of answering that, but I was just going to say, for myself, Martin and Linda, this contract involves all of our work and all of the services that we lead. So as Assistant Director for Early Help, Linda with Health and Martin with Education, all of us and our services have very much worked very closely with Charlotte, and one of the real benefits of being so integrated is that, if Martin through his head teacher briefings picks up worries, then and similarly with, we worked really clever together to ensure that the contract reflects all of our sort of different areas, if that makes sense.
Thanks very much. Councillor Carter, I believe you had a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, for me, it's of course it needs to be recommissioned and a service continued without a doubt. I would question in regards to, I know, Charlotte, you've commented that the social media and the PR is pretty good. I would disagree, respectfully. I think it could be much, much better. Obviously, that registration is high, so whether that's the doctor's referrals or whatever, it's getting people to register, but that attendance doesn't always follow through. From my own ward point of view, we have a children's centre, obviously, in Holbeach. I don't see it promoted much. I truly don't. And I think it could be much, much more. So personally, that's an area I would prefer to see pick up and improved within the new commission. My only other point is, the report is there. It tells us that at the end of the day, we have in Lincolnshire above average of children that have the education and healthcare plan. We have a below average good level development of children. So there's something missing somewhere within it. So it's great that we're now going to relook at that service and focus on the communication, the mixing, these kind of things that are actually COVID born, essentially. But actually there's something else that's missing within it. So I personally would prefer to not see a reduction of 212,000 per year for this service. I know budgets are tight, but I would sooner see that really focused on improving so we have less children with those EHCP plans and reach that good level development and beat the average instead. Thank you.
Thank you. What I would like to say in terms of the communication, which, you know, I appreciate, is that we can make sure within the specification and when we're going out to market that that's very clearly articulated around our expectations, and we can make sure in our work with any future provider that that's something that we really pick up on and improve and make it feel local to local communities, and so I will take that as a clear note and action. Then in terms of the reinvestment of the funding effectively, so instead of taking a saving, should we reinvest and grow? I think we feel that what we won't see, obviously we've talked about the skills development service within it, because we do feel that that's a duplication, that it isn't a best use of resources. And you will know as a committee the pressures that we are facing in our budget. And I suppose what we've done is seek to present an option that means that to families, we feel like they'll still get the service. But at the same time, we will be able to support some of the pressures that we're feeling elsewhere in children's services. And so I suppose it's not ultimately my decision around the budget. I don't know whether Jo wants to come in on that one.
All I was just going to say was that I think I completely understand what you're saying, Councillor Carter. I think that the broader bit is about how this service fits alongside other things that we're doing. And I think, say, the family hubs and supporting families that you heard about before this is a very specific contract that Charlotte's talking about. That presents a whole load of work that is connected to this. So although there is that reduction in the Skills for Life, there is also lots of other services that are being maintained. And I think in terms of your comment around our performance today, I think it is really valid. I think just before the pandemic started, if we can all cast our minds back to 2019, we had a local government association review of our early years delivery because we felt we'd got all the right ingredients in Lincolnshire, but we weren't making the progress that we wanted to. And so there was a really clear strategy, which was obviously slightly disrupted by COVID, but we've refreshed that and it's absolutely back on track. And Linda's Health Visiting Service, the Early Years Service, the commission providers and education are working, together, and we are much more targeted, I think, in terms of our approach to individual children that we know are not going to be making the progress that we need to, and also the individual settings that they sit within. There are some real significant challenges, as many of you will know, because some of our settings are experiencing some real challenges, both in terms of recruiting staff, but also around their financial envelope. And I think the first set of progress data that we get will enable us to re-benchmark, but I do think your points are really valid. The other thing I was going to say in terms of the promotion of the services, again, I agree, and I know Charlotte will take that away. But in terms of the family hubs work, it is a really important strand, and we're going to get some real digital expertise in order to ensure that we are reaching the right families, but also that we can deliver our services in a way that is helpful for families, because for some people, particularly working parents and being able to dial into a virtual session in the evening or at weekends is what they want, and whether that's instead of or to supplement it is something that we really need to look at and focus on. So that'll be part of the priorities.
Can I just come back and say, to be honest with you, Charlotte, I've been really impressed with you today. I think your answers have been exceptional, and it shows how much you are passionate about kind of each of these services that we've touched on today. So I just want to say really well done. So, okay.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, after following the ringing endorsement of Councillor Carter, this is a question not to labour a point, it's just so that I understand the data sets that I'm looking at. And that Councillor Baxter referenced East Europeans when we're talking about BME figures, and of course in every other arena that white East Europeans are not covered under the BME metric. So when I'm looking at these figures, does this include all ethnicities and nationalities, or are we looking at it from the Equalities Act point of view?
Okay, so I've got some figures now because Melissa's been in the background running some reports for us off this as well. So it does include all ethnicities. So the registration, the overall registration data does include all ethnicities. So just to give an example of as of January 2022, for example, the 37,284 under 5s registered, 9.8% of those were white, Eastern European or white other, and that's how they categorise themselves. And that can also include the Eastern European communities in the white other as well. And then 71% of those were white British, and then 10% of those identified them as other ethnic community groups, and that could be, 9.2% of those were other ethnic minority communities, and that could be a wide range, and then 10% chose not to identify what group they were in. Okay.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Gray.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot about children's centres today, and to us they're very positive places to do great work. But to some elements of our community, children's centres means a different thing. And so therefore I've worked quite a bit on projects in the Boston area, and particularly with the Romanian Bulgarian community and the Roma element of those communities. And to them, children's centres are a bad place, because children's centres to them are children's homes, where, and in their own country, parents go to children's homes for their child to be taken away from them. And I thought, well, this is all a bit strange and bizarre when I was hearing this. But so I went on cultural awareness training. So PAB languages, we're doing lots of cultural awareness training with regard to various communities, Romanian, Bulgarian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Polish, Portuguese, Russian. So I've been on all the various training because I was working quite closely in that community. And yes, they confirm that. So particularly to Romanians and Bulgarians and the Roma element, they are bad places. And we know they're not bad places. We know they do great work. So it's just, I just wanted to think we should be aware of that. And perhaps, Charlotte, because I know the great work your service does, that you are aware of that. But I just thought I would raise that because we've heard that term said so much today. And I know when I've spoken to community leaders within the Romanian Bulgarian community, they are bad places as far as they're concerned. So you tell them that they're not. But it's getting that over to them because they've got that mindset. So I just thought it was just important to raise that.
Thank you. Thank you for raising that. I think I'm glad to hear that you've been on those courses. PAB are the provider of the inclusion service and have done a stellar job of that in engaging communities in the county. I think it's really difficult because children's centres are such a, obviously they started as Sure Start, which had a really strong brand that a lot of people still refer to them as Sure Start centres, and then it changed to children's centres, and again it's got a really quite strong national brand in terms of people's understanding, and this is from years and years in the making. And I suppose maybe family hubs and the inception of them gives a chance for us to look at all of the language that we use, because we need to be really clear to our families, don't we, about what does the family hub actually mean? What's the children's centre? And maybe taking into account that, particularly as we've heard that our communities are becoming more diverse, and we need to have a greater understanding of that and make sure that we are, the language that we use is respectful and the right language to use. So I will take that note, and I think that if Joe's heard that too, then as part of our thinking, but I think also we then need to put that in the context of the heavily branded, well-entrenched, known language of the children's centre within our so with that most people would know. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say we have heard that before, and it is something. It's difficult, isn't it? Because as Charlotte's, it means different things to different people, and we need to keep promoting those positive messages. And I think as people in the community change, the messages sometimes get lost, and it does present an opportunity for us to really revisit and rethink that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parker, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the finances because, as Councillor Carter said, I think there's £250,000 expected savings. Does that mean, in a sense, if we can say that now at this point, that the people who are bidding to run the service are within an envelope, that is the money that's available to them, and it's not a question of anything to do with money when it comes to us looking at the contracts? It's more about quality, and do they meet the sort of aspirations that we've got? Because it's highly unusual to go out and have a cap on a service when it comes to competitive tendering.
Yeah, so obviously for what we can't do is share very detailed financial information because it might give people a competitive advantage in terms of when we go out to procurement. But in the background, when we're doing the review, we look at in detail the finances and the cost of the service based on what it is that we think needs to be delivered going forward and whether there's sufficient money to deliver that, whether realistically with the envelope that's available, what we're asking for is viable, basically. When we go to the market, actually primarily in children's, we do put a maximum contract price on there so that when bidders come in, they know that they need to be within that envelope. Because we do the detailed work in advance around whether we think it's feasible, that amount of money. And what that then means is when we are evaluating, we often heavily weight in terms of quality because we expect that providers need to come in within the envelope that we've assured ourselves is sufficient. That allows us then to make sure that the highest quality provision it is evaluated. So you can put in place different percentages for if you're going out for a most economically advantageous tender. So you might have 80% on quality and 20% on price, for example, and we can alter those weightings based on each contract to make sure, you know, in this instance, if we set a maximum price, it means we can then look at making sure we've got really high quality evaluation going on. So I think that's a roundabout way of saying we're assured that the envelope is sufficient to deliver what's needed. The evidence would suggest that the envelope that we've had for the past 5 years to deliver the service has been sufficient. We've not had cost pressures within that service even before the pandemic. And that even with making this saving, we feel that we've got enough there to deliver what we need and that we will evaluate, very much based on the quality of the bids that come in. Yeah.
Just a quick one, yes.
Yeah. So, no overspends. Were there underspends?
Yes, there were underspends in the contract. Some often they were related to staffing turnover. We had some very good staff who, some of them often then move into work in our other children's services. So yes, we do. There were underspends on the contract, and then at that point, what we do is we either look at whether that can be reinvested back into the contract. So can you do more of something else so we don't get an underspend, or there've been instances in this contract, particularly during the pandemic, where money that wasn't needed was clawed back into the authority. So we've got the option to do that within the contract. It comes back in.
Councillor Whittington, I'll make that the last question.
Yeah. Just obviously a point of clarification, of course, and it's always been this council's policy over the last sort of number of years that any underspends in any service up to 1% at the end of each financial year goes back into that service in the following year. So underspends are fed back into the service in the following year. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think we've had a very detailed and thorough discussion this morning on this item, and thanks to Charlotte and her colleagues for taking our questions and giving us some detailed answers. Just to recap on the actions required of us, we're invited to consider the attached report and to determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive Council as set out in the report, and secondly, agree any additional comments to be passed to the Executive in relation to this item. Recommendations to the Executive are set out on page 87 of the agenda pack, and comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy to be passed on to the Executive. And one further comment I'd like to make, it struck me that we've discussed at one point the impact of the pandemic and recovery from the pandemic, and it occurred to me that perhaps the committee might like at some future date an update on how we're catching up on immunisation, health visiting figures and so on. So perhaps we'll bear that one in mind for a future agenda item, because I think that's very relevant. So I therefore propose that we support the recommendations. Please can I have a seconder? Councillor Whittington, thank you. We now vote on this item. You're voting whether you support the recommendations to the Executive and agree to provide the additional comments to the Executive. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? No. Any abstentions? No. That's the recommendation supported. We'll now have our customary 10-minute break, and we'll resume just 11:30. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for your prompt return. We now move to item 7 of the agenda for this morning, which is the Government Green Paper on Special Educational Needs and Disabilities and Alternative Provision. This item summarises the proposals in the Government's Green Paper on Special Education Needs, Disabilities and Alternative Provision, which was published at the end of March. And I'd like to welcome Kate Capel, Head of Service for Inclusion, who will be presenting this report. So it's over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, morning everybody. So as has been set out, I'm presenting the report that's a summary of the Government's Green Paper on Special Educational Needs and Disability and Alternative Provision. The Government brought SEND reforms in with the Children and Families Act back in September 2014. Those reforms were aimed at key changes in the way that children and young people are supported with special educational needs and disability, such as but not limited to expanding it to a 0 to 25 system, expanding it across education, health and social care, that key focus on high aspirations for children and young people with special educational needs and disability, that focus on robust preparation for adulthood and planning around that exit from education into adulthood. And crucially, that key role of parent carers and children and young people in decision making and as part of co-production. The reforms, whilst they've changed the aim and direction, there is many good examples of good practice across England, which is really good. However, what's been recognised is that that's not the norm across England, and so the government launched a review in September 2019 as widespread recognition there was a failure, the reforms were failing to deliver improved outcomes for children and young people, parental confidence in the system was in decline, and despite substantial additional investment, the system had become financially unsustainable. The review was completed and identified 3 key challenges. Those are set out on page 2 of the summary report. Those challenges that were identified formed the basis of the Government's Green Paper, and this was published in March of this year, so 2022. And these set out the challenges and the rationale behind those challenges, but equally sets out, and perhaps more importantly, their proposals around how those challenges are going to be addressed and met to get SEND, special educational needs and disability, back on the right track and in the right direction with good practice across the country. The proposed changes are summarised in the report. They're across pages 2, 3, 4 and 5. If you want to, I believe the Green Paper was also sent out with the papers, which gives the detail around each of those areas. The Green Paper is open to public consultation, and it's open until the 22nd of July, so just over a month's time. Within that, as a local authority, we're encouraging completion of the consultation across our SEND partnerships. So look at that across education, health, social care, and crucially parent carers and children and young people. Within that, obviously, our educational settings, our providers, etc. In key, we're looking at Lincolnshire Parent Carer Forum, Lincolnshire Young Voices, there's Liaise, who is our information, advice and support service, who sits at arm's length to the local authority. There's an East Midlands regional response, and equally as heads of service, Sheridan Dodsworth as head of service for special educational needs and disability, and myself with inclusion with the alternative provision aspect, will be looking at those responses. But what's key here is that individual responses are key, as there are so many different perspectives to these proposals. And so it's absolutely vital that all of those are presented by those representing those perspectives.
Thank you, Kate. I'd like to invite members of the committee to speak on this item. However, before I open it up to all members, Councillor Tom Smith submitted his views on and concerns on the Green Paper to Tracy last week, which has been shared with myself, the Vice Chairman and officers. And so would you like to start by summarising your points briefly, Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Chairman. I will try and be as succinct as I can. Without going and reading through them verbatim, my concerns really are that Her Majesty's government are trying to fit basically a round hole in a square peg, or a square peg in a round hole, as they say. what they mention is exam performance. Well, exams, certainly when I was a student, they changed, even this is pre-COVID, they were continually changing in the last 5 years of my time in education. They changed 4 times. That goes from percentage marks to how the exams were scored, anything, and this was across the board. So that's a struggle for any student, never mind whether you've got special educational needs or otherwise. In terms of EHCPs, there is a problem there hugely, and they are adversarial and complex, as has already been alluded to. And that's because they're, to get what I would call statemented, and I'm showing my age, when the process was changed, has become even harder, and that's what parents want. They want their child, as I'll call it, statemented, because certainly in the system currently, that is what gives you, as a disabled learner and as a parent, the most confidence that your child will have that support in place is that you are statemented, so you have your protections written down, and it's a legally binding document. And this goes on to the issue around being, and you'll excuse me, Chairman, while I just look at the green paper.
Can I just
yes,
call a halt just there,
yeah.
Tom? I believe Councillor Bradwell wishes to come in at
certainly.
this point. Sorry about that.
Mr. Chairman, I'll wait my turn. I don't want to butt in, but I've just put my hand up to speak at some point. Okay.
Okay, Councillor Bradwell, thanks very much. Tom, if you'd like to continue.
Thank you, Chairman. One could easily argue as well, because they go on about increased spend in the SEN system, that increased spend partly is in part due to the time taken to get an EHCP, and obviously if parents are obviously unsuccessful in the initial phase, then their only redress is actually at present to go through the court system, which is exceedingly time consuming and expensive, but parents will, and quite rightly, will do what they think is right for their child. In point 21 of the summary, if you read it, to me what that says is anybody with and this is a personal view, I have no sort of statistical evidence for this, I appreciate, but for somebody and a great many who have a moderate or lower scale special educational needs condition as I did, certainly when I was, and I appreciate it was some time ago, but when I was a student, mainstream school, certainly in my instance, I would have had a very different life had I been in a mainstream school, because I don't think I'd have had the support I needed at that time to be where I am now, and that concerns me, especially for people with similar conditions that I had, that we will fall, when the new system comes into place, unless it's altered drastically, they will fall through the cracks, and they will essentially go into a mainstream school by default, which happened in a lot of instances, even when I was at school then. I think this increases that risk of going in by default, which is a great concern, really. And again, the introduction of a national framework of banding and price tariffs, depending on what that means, because it doesn't really go into great detail. But if my understanding is correct, Mr. Chairman, that's concerning, because what that says to me is, well, if you have a higher need, so your banding is, say, a band A, and your amount of money that you have to support that is up here, but your banding's lower, so you get less. That, to me, if I'm understanding that right, is a 2-tier level of support, which is deeply concerning, to put it mildly. I will avoid some points, Chairman, as they... there is a concern as well that they want to make EHCPs light touch. Now, whilst I understand you don't want to make anything overly bureaucratic and overly complex for the parents of those who are dealing with it, having seen how an EHCP and a completed one, they're very different from what statement used to be. If you go much more light touch, Chairman, I've got concerns that actually they're not doing the job they're supposed to do. Again, that's a personal concern. I've got no evidence to substantiate that. And that again goes back to point 19 in the section of, and I do excuse me, Mr. Chairman, the SEN system since 2014, because irrelevant of your socio-economic background, children with SEN who need support should get that support, whatever that issue is. And reading that part of the paper certainly didn't come across that to my mind. In point 34, it references high quality high quality mainstream provision in terms of supporting SEND students. Now, again, it's a personal view. I have not been made aware of or come across what I would call high quality. Good, don't get me wrong, yes. What I would consider as is high quality, no. The national standards must allow good SEND local authorities, like we are here in Lincolnshire, and I'm proud to say that, to function in a manner that enables them to stay effective. Furthermore, no processes must make it hard for those parents and carers who think their children or young person should be in a specialist environment or alternative provision that's provided by the state from accessing it, which I believe there is a real risk that this may do that. The new SEND partnerships that are seeking to be created need to have a real change and need to have real teeth to make a real change and real difference, not a talking shop, which I know a number of parents, certainly the old systems, they were seen as talking shops rather than making a real change to the students and the children and young people there that were going through that process. And I will touch on this as well, Mr. Chairman, in respect to the bespoke framework in terms of reintegration into mainstream school. I think for a large number of people with special educational needs, especially those with more complex needs, personally I think is an unrealistic benchmark in terms of when you're coming from alternative provision, the document that says, oh, we want you to go to a mainstream school. What I think is a more realistic benchmark for those who are in alternative provision is to go into what I will term, and pardon the term because it's clunky, a conventional special educational needs environment rather than alternative provision, because the alternative provision to me seems to be used when parents don't have an EHCP, they don't think that their child or young person will cope in mainstream school, so they use alternative provision, which is often a higher level than your conventional special educational needs school. So to go from here down to here, I think the government is setting itself up to fail quite drastically. In terms of the mega trusts, as they've been termed, this has already started to happen with mainstream schools, which is a concern because that then removes your ability of, say, grammar schools, etc., to function. But this, in terms of special educational needs, to me, Chairman, I think will be a real nail in the coffin. Special educational needs schools, in my experience, worked because they each had their very own distinct ethos and they were each very different from each other. They weren't all part of one large, almost business, if you like, which again goes back to my long-standing concern about generalisation rather than specialisation of special needs schools, which the Her Majesty's government seem to want to push. I've seen the good side and the bad side of that, as I've said before, Mr. Chairman, and I know it's referenced in an upcoming paper, so I shall leave that there. I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Chairman, because I know you and the Vice Chairman have seen the rest, but thank you for allowing me to go through that, just to give other members a very briefer précis than my notes, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks very much for sharing your experiences and insights. I am aware Councillor Bradwell wishes to speak, but perhaps if Kate would like initially to come back on that.
Gosh, not quite sure where to start, but yeah, very valid, valued comments, and I think, I go back to my final point when I was presenting, which is the importance of those direct responses. We're able to respond individually to the government on this paper and those. Fully take on board some of the comments. Exams changing is outside the control of us as a local authority, so it's something that potentially will need to go back to the government for their views. I think looking at the time taken for EHC needs assessments to take place and look at whether it's appropriate for an EHC plan to be in place or not. I'm very pleased to say that in 2021 our completion within the 20 weeks was at 94.5%. This year so far we're at 95.8%. When considered against the national average is really good, but equally is good for the children and young people in our county. I'm also pleased to sort of point out that our appeals rate in 2021 was at 1.4%. And when you consider that against the number of EHC plans, in 2022 so far we've had 31 appeal outcomes. When you consider we've got, I think it's 6,000, just shy of 6,700 EHC plans at the moment. Comments about mainstream, then obviously this review and this green paper is aimed at strengthening the mainstream offer and the confidence in that mainstream. And I think that's supported through work within the local authority around the higher needs transformation strategy and a number of other avenues that's being in place, not least things like the retendering of the behaviour outreach support service, which again links with our alternative provision and other services such as our autism learning difficulties service, which has been retendered with a focus on supporting mainstream settings, etc. Yeah, I mean, you know, take on board the comments about alternative provision. Alternative provision has come into this paper, wasn't expected, but can see the links. We'd already forged those links in Lincolnshire, and looking at those around how alternative provision is used robustly, not least through the ladder of intervention, also our emotional based school avoidance pathway. So a variety of things. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I've covered everything. There was a lot to kind of consider there. And as I come back to, you know, I'm very conscious that you know, SEND, special educational needs and disability, doesn't just sit with the SEND services we've heard earlier this morning. There's many other aspects that it overlaps and interlocks with so much other work that the local authority is doing. Don't know, Martin, if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, thank you, Kate, and thank you, Councillor Smith, for your comments and questions. I think some of the worthwhile comments that you've made need to be contextualised for Lincolnshire. So in Lincolnshire, it always has been, as a consequence of the Code of Practice, of making sure that maintained schools are delivering the bulk of provision for children with special educational needs, and that the most complex cases, whether that's health, education, social care, are in that specialist sector within the county. And I think in Lincolnshire we've done really well in terms of managing that transformation during the pandemic. There are approximately a third of children with an EHCP in the special school system, and those, the 2/3 who are not in the special school system, are existing within our mainstream settings. So I just think it's important to highlight that our mainstream schools on the whole are delivering and supporting children with needs, not to mention the much larger group of children at SEN support that live in our mainstream school system. And schools are really committed to inclusion. I think I recognise and would agree with some of the consultation comments around developing the skills and expertise and knowledge for our teachers, teaching assistants in the mainstream, so that they're given the confidence and enabled to support those children and young people to the best that they can be. In terms of trusts, and I appreciate academisation and trusts is written into the green paper, it also features in the white paper and many other papers that are currently in existence. It's worthwhile noting that whatever the structure in Lincolnshire, our relationship with our special schools, majority of which are in trusts, is excellent, and they've collaborated with us, co-produced, co-designed within Lincolnshire, and I think we need to be really proud of that work. In terms of the point around children with high needs moving into mainstream, etc. Just wanted to flag up the feedback from our transformation programme that we've delivered previously in Lincolnshire, where we had 12 children considered, and 9 of those children actually successfully transferred from specialist settings to mainstream, and that enabled them to be able to access a full Key Stage 4 curriculum, which for them in terms of exams, yes, but also independence, lifelong learning, employability contributes a positive point. And in terms of the finances, the banding side of things, it's probably just, whatever your views may be on that, it's worthwhile noting that that process is different in every local authority. So what a band A is or a band B is different in the country. So levelling that up could well be a positive in terms of equalising the system. So I'm sure there were many other points, but I just wanted to pick up on some of those. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Martin. I think Councillor Whittington, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I think some of it might have been covered in the comments that have just been made by the officers, because I was going to ask, because obviously we're much aware of the fact that, you know, we're currently halfway through a sort of £86 million development of our send provision in the county. So my question really was, you know, looking at the proposals in the Green Paper, was really just to kind of see, obviously, you know, the Green Paper is looking at send provision across the whole country. So my question really was, how are we currently in relation to the Green Paper in terms of what we actually do? And then with special reference to the expansion of the places of the provision that we're coming halfway through. But I think some of it might have been answered. But if I was to get any more comments, thanks.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we're very mindful that these are proposals at the moment. So there's lots of areas where I would hope we can say that Lincolnshire is in that, many examples of good practice. I think some of that, as I've mentioned, you know, and Martin covered as well, around aspects of meeting timescales, etc. So I think, you know, there's a number of areas we're good, and I think, as always, there are areas of development, but I think that's something that we need to kind of identify as we move forward with the Green Paper, as we know goes through stages, and identifying what work needs to be done as this moves into legislation.
Martin, just come in.
Thank you, Chair. I think the nub of your question, Councillor Whittington, is we're investing £86 million in increasing the special school sector capacity. That £86 million is creating 512 places, so we'll be at 2,512 special places in the special school system. I think your question is, will demand outstrip that number? I think without transformation work and a future change in direction, yes, they will be used. Notwithstanding, we already use a number of independent school placements for really complex cases where there's residential, social care, health and other needs in one place. And I think it's also worthwhile, just for the committee to be aware of, I'm having lots of conversations with other local authorities where their timescales for EHCPs are in sub 50, and are also interested in how our partnership and the work of the local authorities is enabling some of the increased capacity. The DFE, we're almost ahead of the curve. The DFE are just now beginning to consider what does capacity need to be done in the system, and they are releasing capital funding for special school placement, but it is nowhere near to the same extent of the ambition and aspiration of Lincolnshire. So, you know, that's a good news story in sense. Does that assist?
Yeah, I think it does, because obviously, you know, I kind of sort of reading through it, I kind of thought, well, I think we're already doing a lot of this anyway, and you know, we have recognised the importance, hence the £86 million that we are investing in SEND provision. So it's really just to get a feel of in relation to the Green Paper, where we are placed, because I kind of get the impression, what I know about children's services, that we are placed in a good position in relation to it all, but obviously aware of the fact that they are all proposals and things may change over time. But I think my questions have been answered. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parker, I believe you have a question?
Question and comments. I'm interested in knowing whether or not we recognise the points made, I think it's on page 190, about the 3 challenges in relation to special education needs. And given the fact that we are an excellent authority in terms of children's services, I'd be interested in seeing a comment about the case for change and also the challenges that are listed on that page, 1, 2 and 3. I'm chair of an infants school, and one of the things that we did was to write to Tony McArdle, remember him, Chief Executive here, who was part of the process of delivering this Green Paper. And the point that we made consistently is that because of the delay in the system to get to see a psychologist, the financial owners stayed with the individual school in order to get some sort of service to the child with special education needs. In other words, teaching assistants were employed for long periods of time pending a psychologist being available. If that's the case, then yes, the change in the system may benefit a lot of people, but I wonder whether or not the dearth of psychologists in the sense of availability of them, and we discussed similarly at Overview and Scrutiny Management Board a week or so ago, the shortage of lawyers and social workers. I can't help but feel that psychologists ought to be added to that pool, simply because the golden ticket that a lot of parents are looking for are a statement, positive statement from a psychologist. Okay, it takes a long time to get to that process. In the meantime, schools, individual schools, have got to pay for the extra support that's needed, and I'd be interested in comments about those points.
Sorry, I was trying to find the page you're referring to for part of that, so apologies. Yeah, our educational psychology service in Lincolnshire, we have as a locum service, so we are able to access the educational psychology support and provision as needed. There's also accessibility through the RSAL advice line. I take on board what you're saying about don't want those to create barriers to receiving the right support at the right time. And certainly within Lincolnshire that's not happening, as we can see from our timescales around EHC needs assessments, etc. So I'm not seeing that as a key issue, although yeah, I'm aware the government were also reviewing the numbers and the support for educational psychology nationally at one point, and looking at how that could be sort of invested in, linked with the shortages.
Thanks very much. I believe Councillor Bradwell used to come in.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Well, I think actually, Tom, you gave a very good explanation about, you know, perhaps where we were a few years ago. I think since the educational health and care plans came in, I think things have changed. And I remember years ago going into our special schools, and they were, you know, they weren't doing what our special schools do now. We have lots of people in special schools who will then go on to college and get some qualifications. But I know, and colleagues in the here today have been to, as you've heard, the openings of our special schools, and maybe we could, after September, perhaps we wouldn't be able to take a lot of you, but we could take, you know, 3 or 4 perhaps into the special schools to understand how the learning is now. We have some young people in there who've got real challenges and obviously can't do what other young people can do. But also in our primary schools, I mean, I was a governor for a number of years, and when I think back to the support that families were given actually mainstream school, now it's so much different. You know, they've teachers and that have got an avenue in to ask for support in county offices and that. And I remember as a governor, you know, extreme frustration sometimes from teachers because, you know, they just needed some expertise given to them, because obviously we all know school teachers in mainstream schools are there to teach a lot of the time mainstream children, and sometimes a child can have a specific need that actually getting some advice really helps in the classroom. And now that advice is there, and I know from speaking to head teachers and that they really value the changes that have been made. But that's not to say we're going to stand still, because I think, you know, life has to evolve. And as I say, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, if you were in a special school, it's very different to the education you receive now. So maybe we can, I can speak with Martin, or to sort of arrange for perhaps members very near to where they live to just pop in to see what's happening, because I think you would be really amazed. I mean, truly, that these young people are happy and they are learning. I mean, I remember when we went down to Bourne, the young people had made us cakes and all sorts of things like that. So they're doing, not only learning, but they're doing things as well, which they probably have to do later in life. So that's all, Mr. Chairman. And I know you were talking, you've been, and I think maybe you would think it might be valuable for some of our members just to go and see both in mainstream and special schools. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bradwell. Yes, I think members are encouraged to visit the different types of schools within their area. I think it's very informative to do so. Do we have any further speakers, Councillor Gray?
No one indicating, Mr. Chairman, no.
Thanks very much. Members will be aware that Children's Services will be completing a response to the consultation, and I don't know whether it's premature at this stage to ask officers whether there are any issues that they're going to highlight in the response.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of the issues that we would include would be around funding, financing and transparency of thresholds of the expectations of the revised Code of Practice, and how this would be implemented, particularly over a period of time. I will just also stress that, as Kate highlighted, the number of people who are eligible to respond is the public, communities, families, etc. But it's also for the local authority and its partners, so there will be multiple responses, hence why there wouldn't really be a best way of saying there is one model response, because everybody will have a different view on it. But we will let the committee know of the outcome of that consultation as soon as it's ready.
Thanks very much. That's very helpful. Thank you. The actions required of us in this case were to review and comment on the summary of the government's Green Paper. I propose, therefore, that the committee has reviewed the summary of the government's proposals, and the comments made by members are taken into consideration when completing the council's report to the consultation. Can you please raise your hands if you agree? That's great. Thanks very much. And thanks again to Councillor Smith for his work he's done on this and his contribution he made to that today. Thanks very much. We'll move on to item 8 now, which is Building Communities of Specialist Provision, Together in Lincolnshire, update on workforce development strategy. This item provides an update on the progress made in the implementation of the SEND workforce development learning platform within the Building Communities of Specialist Provision strategy. And this report was requested by the committee in October when we last considered the progress on the strategy, and I'd like to welcome Eileen McMorrow, Programme Manager, Special School Strategy, to present this report. So it's over to you, Eileen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come back and update you all on the workforce development element of the Building Communities of Specialist Provision strategy. I won't go into details of the strategy. I know it's something that all of you are incredibly aware of and probably know it just as well as I do at this stage. So I will focus just on the elements of the report and the workforce development element as it's making progress. So as can be seen from the paper, this provision has now been fully commissioned. For your information, it's to a value of 136,000, which is ring-fenced from the ring-fenced DSG revenue allocation, which was set aside at the offset of the programme for this. It's a sustainable model, so there is an initial outlay for the council, and then subsequently from that it will be funded through the training opportunities through the Lincolnshire Wolds Federation, who we have commissioned to provide the service. So it's been provided by the Lincolnshire SEND Alliance, led by the Lincolnshire Wolds Federation Community Trust, who the council have worked closely with throughout developing and implementing the wider strategy. Contract management meetings have commenced. The purpose of the workforce development strategy is to ensure that in an all-needs school system, special school staff have the skills and knowledge to meet a much wider range of needs, and to ensure that parents and carers have the confidence to meet that the needs of their child can be met in the county's special schools.
The strategy will also ensure that mainstream school staff, other professionals and parent carers have access to high quality resources and information regarding SEND to support their future learning. At the centre of the strategy is the SEND Learning Platform, which will bring together in one place high quality resources and training opportunities for school staff and ultimately mainstream schools and parents and carers. These resources will be digitally accessible to all via the Lincolnshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership Learning Platform, so utilising a system which we already control and offer to our communities, ensuring that pupils with SEND are supported by individuals who have access to high quality training, so all pupil need can be met. As can be seen in Annex A in your packs, the learning platform offers a tiered approach, with each level targeting a specific cohort of school staff. The introductory level provides learning support and resources for everyone in the school, irrespective of their role, to ensure minimum competency standard. The purpose of this is not just around standards, but also to ensure that there is a culture and awareness of inclusion and SEND from school caretaker, lunchtime supervisor through to head, so that everybody accepts the responsibility that SEND is all of our responsibilities. Tier 1 level provides learning and support and resources for those who have a more specific interaction with children and young people with SEND, where their role allows them increased opportunities to adjust their practice and or their environment. And Tier 2 provides learning support and resources to those who require a greater depth of SEND knowledge, as they have continuous and direct involvement with educating children with SEND. Appendix B in your paper shows the proposed content of the platform as it currently stands. This is subject to review through our contract management meetings. We've already had a few recommendations and suggestions around things that we might have missed out, but the original list came from sector-led, from senior leaders within the sector on the areas that they felt needed further training on. These areas of learning will are aligned with the 4 categories of SEND in the SEND Code of Practice and the proposed learning methods. The delivery model will be implemented over the next 2 years, with full sector-wide implementation by September 2023. The learning platform is currently on track for a full launch by February 23, as can be seen in section 1.4 showing the implementation timeline. However, the learning platform is progressing well and it may be possible to bring this forward. The SEND Learning Platform forms part of the Council's wider vision for SEND provision, and as a result cannot be implemented in isolation of the Council's SEND transformation strategy. The Learning Platform will also provide direct links to the Valuing SEND approach and toolkit, and also provide training for staff to access VSEND, the Ask SAL advice line, and also the SEND inclusion toolkit. The paper sets out the progress made to date, but as developments of the learning platform is quite fast-paced, there are a couple of further updates I'd like to share with you since the paper was submitted. The content for the induction level is now complete and has been through quality assurance process. It is currently being uploaded onto the learning platform as we speak this week and should be completed by next week. And I have some of that to show you here today. So Tracy, if you wouldn't, I'm going to do my Chris Whitty and say next slide please moment, if that's okay. I have some live elements to show you. So as you can see from here, this is so the way the system will work is as the Lincolnshire Safeguarding Children's Platform works at the moment. You will go in, there'll be a big green button that says send, and you will press through to that. As you go through, there will then be a video which is being provided by Lincolnshire Young Voices, which is around SEND and inclusion, and everybody will have to view that before they're allowed to go any further on. The key there being about getting the voice of the young person, the voice of the child through. And then there will be various sections as you go through that you'll be able to log into and look at resources, articles, e-learnings, fact sheets, videos, various different resources. So this, for example, would be the front sheet of respecting individuals. So we have a number of buttons for people to click on if they want to do the e-learning module, if they want to do an article, if they want to read a fact sheet, and this will be accessible all the way through, as you'll be able to see from the contents page in Appendix B. So we've gone to the next one, Tracy. So I have an example of a fact sheet for you. So this is one of the awareness of neurotypical development fact sheets. And this has been, all of the content, I should say, has been developed and devised by our sector leaders, by our special school leaders, and by our learning partnerships, our school learning hubs. So that's an example of what a member of staff will be able to read through in terms of an initial fact sheet at the induction level. Thank you very much. So as you say, it's pitched very generically as well. Our Parent Care Forum have been involved in terms of feedback, in terms of the types of information that we're sharing and how we're sharing it, and it's all been quality assured. So here would be, this is an article on the SEND Code of Practice that's been written from a parent's perspective. So it's very much a case study that people will be able to read through, potentially learning from other people's experiences of the SEND Code of Practice and the EHCP process. And then the final page on each of these sections will be useful resources. And at this point, it will be signposting to either commission training, which is obviously already in place, or it'll be through to really useful webinars, videos. So it's not necessarily about the learning platform providing absolutely everything for everybody. It's about bringing everything into one place so that this becomes the first port of call if you need to know anything about SEND, from whether it's our parent carers, our mainstream schools, or our special schools. And I think to go back to a point that you raised, Councillor Smith, around the knowledge and skills of our mainstream schools, and hopefully this will be a really useful tool in upskilling our mainstream schools around SEND. So thank you very much, Tracy. Just a couple of other points to raise in terms of progress so far that isn't in the paper. Engagement has commenced with the University of Lincoln and BGU in terms of plans to establish accredited routes through all of the tiers for our student teachers. So ensuring that our future teachers are all teachers of SEND. And a programme of progress updates with Council's education briefings has commenced, which will culminate in the launch of the learning platform later this year. So that's where we are now, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Eileen. Do you have any? Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thanks, Eileen. My first question you answered, because I was asking what we were doing with the University of Lincoln and Bishop Grotesque to roll it out. The other two questions I've got is, obviously, we're aware that children in care probably are more likely to need support from SEND. Is there any specific resources available? Because children in care, because of the nature of a lot of what's happened to them in their lives, do have specific needs and requirements. Are there any training resources available around that? Because I'm very much aware that their needs are sometimes a little bit different. And second, and the final question really is, these resources, will they be open to members to sort of educate ourselves around SEND? Thank you.
So I'll take the
microphone, please.
Sorry. Sorry, so if I take the last question first, it absolutely will be. So anyone who can log on to the Lincolnshire Children's Partnership, Safeguarding Children's Partnership platform can also log into this. And equally, we will be spreading it wider, because obviously at the moment parents and carers can't log into that, but each school will have a login to be able to share with parents and carers as well. And we're hoping to be able to do that with early years settings too. So yes, I think it's particularly interesting in relation to children in care. There are some sections of the content which focus specifically on social, emotional and mental health needs, particularly around trauma-informed practice. And I think they'll be particularly relevant to the professionals for children in care. Also in terms of things like mental health first aid will be in there as well. But equally, that's something that we can keep on our agenda with our providers and make sure that they're covering those areas.
Because obviously it was a social section that I looked at and immediately thought of children in care, and they have very specific needs. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Eileen? I have a couple of questions. I was just thinking about, is there a cost model in terms of schools having to pay a fee to use the service? And also, is there built into this an updating system? And will it become sort of self-sufficient, self-funding in due course?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a cost model in place. So if I start with in terms of access for schools, it's free to use at point of contact. Where there will be a charge and a cost, and this links to the sustainability of the service, will be where Lincolnshire Wales Federation and the Send Alliance provide direct training. So whether that be online or face-to-face, there will be a cost expectation there, as there would be in terms of any training provision that would be provided. And then that leads naturally then on to the self-sufficiency and the sustainability. At the moment, we've funded upfront, on a phased payment approach, for the implementation and for the first year of service, and then from then our expectation is that Lincolnshire Wales Federation will ensure that it is a sustainable service funded by through the training opportunities that they provide. And then in terms of updating, there is a gentleman employed specifically for that purpose, who is their lead on quality assurance and also ensuring that the information is always up to date, of standard, and approved by Lincolnshire County Council as well.
That's great to hear. Thanks very much. If there are no further questions to Eileen, then just to remind members what's required of us is we've been invited to review and comment on the implementation of the SEND Workforce Development Learning Platform. I therefore propose that the committee has reviewed the implementation of the SEND Workforce Development Learning Platform and is satisfied with the progress so far, and that a further update be included as part of the annual review of the Building Communities of Specialist Provision Strategy in October this year. Thanks again for your responses. Can you raise your hand if you agree with that proposal? Thank you very much. That is agreed. We now move on to item 9, the last item on our agenda today, and that's the Scrutiny Committee work programme. The item sets out our work programme for this year, and I'd like to invite Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, to present the report. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have one announcement to make in terms of an amendment. The Children in Care and Care Leavers Strategy Decision Report, which is currently listed for the 9th of September meeting, has been deferred to the 21st of October meeting to allow more time for completion, and it will then be considered by the Executive on the 1st of November. Otherwise, I'm happy to take any suggestions for the future work programme. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Tracy. Do members have any comments to make on the future work programme? All happy? I take it you are. There's no response. Thanks very much. The actions required of us, as usual, are to review and agree the committee's work programme as set out in the report, to highlight for discussion any additional scrutiny activity. I think we have added one or two things in the course of the meeting, actually, to be fair, Tracy, this morning, such as updates on the post-pandemic situation. And so that's been done. I therefore propose that the work programme is agreed. Can you raise your hand if you agree? Thank you very much. That's agreed, and that concludes the business of the meeting, and thanks everyone for your attendance and for your contributions. Most welcome. It's good to have a detailed discussion rather than just presentations, but we've had responses from members, including our substitute members, which is great. So thanks very much, and see you at the next meeting. Thank you.